Good morning, Rabbi.
Thank you. Okay. So we ended off yesterday towards the bottom of Nun Gimel Beis, but not really. Yes, about halfway down in words. So we had this whole conversation that Hashem spoke with Avraham about at the time of the Beis Hamikdash, and we're now right after that. And that we're right after that conversation of the word L'kol Hamula Gedola. So about 6 lines before it gets wide. So the Gemara says, L'kol Hamula Gedola Hetis Eish Alal. Faru Dal Yosef. Says to the sound of the Hamula, the mumbling, the murmuring, something like that, the great murmuring, they set fire on it, and Ra'u Dal Yosef. And it's poverty, its poor ones were in bad shape, I think, is what it's trying to say. So Amar Mechinina Bar Papa, what does it mean? L'kol mileim shal meraglin. What does it mean? Kol Hamula. It's a language of the voices of the words of the spies. From that, Yisrael Dal Yosef Shel Israel. We're weakened the poor ones of Israel, meaning the ultimate root cause of the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash and the exile of Jews was because of the sin of the spies. The Amar Mechinina Bar Papa, because Mechinina Bar Papa said, Davar Gadol Dibru HaMeraglin. The Meraglim, the spies, spoke something great, meaning something terrible. But also at that time they said that this nation in Israel is stronger than us. Al Tikre Mimenu, don't read stronger than us. El Mimenu, stronger than him. What does it mean, him? Kivyachol, as if it were possible to say such a thing. To feel Balabais, that even the Balabais, even Hashem, couldn't get his things out. Meaning this nation is so strong, Chas b'Shalom. But they say what they're trying to say was this nation is stronger than Hashem. Even Hashem has no access to Eretz Yisrael. This nation there is too strong, and we have no way to get in. Even with Hashem's help, it wouldn't be enough. So Maskivla Reb Chia Bar Chenina. Reb Chenina challenged this interpretation of the pasuk. It says, "Hi, Kol Hamula Gedola." This is where it says the sound of the murmuring, this great murmuring, should they call Mila Biboil? It should say the sound of the words. Words aren't murmuring, it's a different word. Even though it's the same letters, it doesn't quite fit. Ella Amar Lo Kadosh Baruch Hu Avram. Rather, what does it refer to? Hashem said to Avram, Kol Hashemati, I heard your voice, V'chamalti Lehem, and I took pity on them. Why? In what way? Ani Yamarti, I said Yishtabdu Ba'arba Malchios, that the Jews should be excuse me, short for Yishtabdu, should be bound, should be subjugated for 4 exiles, under 4 kingships. Each one of the 4 kingships, Kishir Arba Malchios, for the length of time of 4 kingships, for 4 exiles. Now, because you're crying, each one of them, each exile might have pasuk is based on the length of time that each one is, not combining each 4 into 1 each time. There are those that say, Ani Amarti B'Zachazeh, I said exiles 4 sequentially. Aksha B'Vasachas, now it's 4 simultaneously. I'm not sure what that means practically, but that somehow it's like a what's the term for it? Someone says not consecutive, concurrently. There we go. 4 exiles concurrently somehow. I'm not sure practically what that means, but that instead of having 4, one after the other, all 4 count at once. Amar Yeshua ben Levi. Going back to what we said earlier, part of this discussion we had yesterday, where we ended off, was it says the Jewish people are like an olive tree. So Amar Yeshua ben Levi, Lamanim Shli Yisrael Azayis. Why were the Jews compared to an olive tree? I'm going to tell you, Mazayis Ein Alav Noshrin, that its leaves do not fall off. Lo Mimosachama, not in the summer, but Mosakishamim, not in the winter. So it is, even though it's a leaf-bearing tree, but its leaves don't fall off when it gets cold. Af Yisrael, so to the Jewish people, Ein Lehem, but Taylor, if no notification, Allah means permanently, not in this world, not in the next world, they'll always be a Jewish people. What's another reason Jews were compared to an olive tree? Just like an olive does not produce oil unless you crush it, so the Jewish people does not return to the proper behavior except by Yisurim, by unpleasant circumstances. Hashem squeezes us, so to speak, and that's what brings us back to Him. But when everything's good, we go on whatever path we're on. We don't return. Okay, back to our Mishnah. So we had the question: how do you make the chametz for the carbon toda and the shtei lachem? If you have the exact measurement of flour and you try to bring sourdough starter, then it doesn't fit the calculation. So what do you do? So it says. Rameir says Rameir says you take flour out, you make it into sourdough, and then you sourdough starter, and then you put it back in. So it says and the problem with doing the other way. There are two ways to do it. That's Rameir's way. Rabbi Yehuda's way was you take actual sourdough starter, put it into the measure, then fill the rest of it with flour. The problem we said it'll be more or less. It says my chaser or you say what would be more or less if you use sourdough starter. Rav Chisda, Isa says, or Ava, if the original sourdough starter they're putting in is thick, then say Sisera, and you're finding extra flour beyond Midas Isara, more than the amount of an Isara. Raka, if the sourdough starter is a thin mixture, fluffy, then say Sisera, then you're lacking. It says, hold on, Sof, Isara and Kakayo. At the end of the day, it's filling up an Isar. So what's the problem? Rabbi Yosef Damar Tavayu. They both said the Kamosh Shaheen Haisa Misharin. You don't measure by the size it is now, you measure by the flour amount that it was before. So you have a sourdough starter, you don't measure what it looks like, the amount of flour, you don't look at the volume of the flour it is now, you look at the original volume when it was in the state of flour. And therefore it might be off. Now, Gemara has a new suggestion. Maybe Dr. Kutner could come up with it. A very, very simple suggestion. Anyone can come up with it, right? It says, "V'lishkol purtamine." Why don't you take a certain amount of flour away from it, and mix that with sourdough starter? So let's say you take take 2 cups of flour, let that sit in the dough with sourdough starter. And bring it back. Bring those 2 cups of flour back. And mix it in together with it. So now you have everything. You have the original flour. You know exactly how much it is. You have it. You have it. Now Rashi does a whole calculation exactly how bring back the same amount of flour you had before. But you mix it in such a way. Some 2 very long Rashis, different explanations here. But like I said, maybe the Kutners maybe Dr. Kutner could figure out exactly what's going on in the second explanation, but it has to do with calculating exactly proportionately how much is the starter is the original sourdough starter is expanding. This use the calculation, you figure out this flour that you originally had, how much it's expanded, and you can take back the whatever amount of flour you took out. You can bring that exact flour itself back to mix with the other flour. So what's wrong with doing that? That way you have the exact right amount. So no, it's a decree. It's a gzera. You might come to make flour from elsewhere. Meaning, someone watches what you're doing, and they see you taking. You have this isara. You have this measure of flour for the mincha. They see you adding sourdough starter to it. They don't realize that sourdough starter was originally part of this flour. They just see you bring external sourdough starter and putting it in. So they'll think that's what you're supposed to do. So next time, I'll measure a full sourdough flour and add sourdough starter to that full amount. And that for sure is no good. So since people are going to become confused, they have to do one of these other techniques, which is not as good in one way or another. But nevertheless, these other techniques don't lead to problems. Okay. Gemara continues. Tanur Banan. Ein machmitzim etzavuchim. We cannot leaven the bread with apples. Apparently, apples have some natural yeast growing on them, and you can't use apples to make the bread chametz. Moshe Mechinina ben Gamliel Omer machmitzin said no, you can use apples. Rav Kahani Maskila Rabbi Chanina ben Tradian. He says it wasn't Rabbi Chanina ben Gamliel, it's Rabbi Chanina ben Tradian who said that you can use apples. Kaman azlaha, like whom does the following, with like which opinion does the following opinion go? The time, like it says, tepuach shubisku, you have an apple that was chopped up or pulverized, and you put it into a dough, and it becomes chametz. That's forbidden on Pesach. Come on, like whom does it? Like whom does this go? Lema would say that's Rabbi Chanina ben Gamliel. And this falls between Rabbi Chanina ben Gamliel, not the rabbis, because Rabbi Chanina ben Gamliel said you can use apples to make it the chametz. Whereas it answers no. Afilu te'er rabbanon. Even you could even say it's a rabbi's talk. We say this. He the chametz kamer lo have. Even though that it won't make chametz, it won't make real proper chametz. Can't make proper bread by using apples to ferment it, to leaven it. Nevertheless, nuksha miyahave, but it still is what's called hardened chametz. There are various degrees of items that are somewhat chametzdik that are forbidden on Pesach, but they're not fully chametz. So you can definitely use apples to start some kind of fermentation process. It's on the path to being chametz. Therefore, even though it doesn't make good chametz, not work for mincha, but it still will be forbidden on Pesach.
That's why we don't have apple matzah. The fruit matzah.
Right. Well, it's part of it. The Gemara says that fruit juices don't make dough. Fruit juice doesn't ferment.
But
That's somewhat related to it. Yeah.
It's interesting. Yeah.
So Amar Reb Ila, he says, "Ein lacha hakasha lekmitza yoser b'mincha eschote." There is no kind of mincha that is hard to do the action of kmitza more so than the mincha of a sinner. Every mincha had oil in it, and by mixing flour with oil, it becomes the dough. And so when it's a dough, then you can take a handful of it. But if it's just dry flour, to try to take a handful of it that fills an exact handful fully is very difficult. Rabbi Yitzchak bar Avdimi Amar, no, it's not so hard. Minchas chote, the sin offering. So a sin mincha does not have any oil on it. That's what makes it so hard. So Rabbi Yitzchak bar Avdimi says the minchas chote, the mincha of a sin offering, you mix it with water. It's not just pure flour; it's mixed with water. The kshera, and it's kosher, and that makes it much easier to take a handful. So lema, let's say this is what they're arguing about. Tamar Savar, one says that you measure it as it is now. You measure it the way it was. Opinion says you measure as it is. Adding flour doesn't ruin it, because however it is, whatever size of flour is mixed with water, that's what counts, and therefore you can measure it when you had flour. And the opinion that says you measure based on what it was, that's a problem, because when you add water to it, change the volume, it's not going to come out right. Because you have to have a full handful. So before we're talking about a full vessel when measuring it, here we're talking about having a full handful. So you put water in it, you're not getting the exact right amount, so your hand is not going to be full. Maybe it'll be over full if it becomes more dense when you add water. Maybe it'll be partially empty if it becomes less dense, but you don't use the quantity of flour it is now. It's quantity of flour it was when it was dry. He said, no, they disagree. That's not true. Kollel, Evan agrees. You measure it as it is now. This is what they're arguing about. Mar Savar, one says, my chareva. What does it mean when it calls it dry? Versus any mincha that's mixed with oil or dry. So dry is clearly referring to the sin offering of a mincha sin offering. So what does it mean dry? Charev mishem, it means dry of oil, but you can still put water in. Mar Savar, my other master says, it says, chareva mikol davar. It means dry entirely from everything, not water either. Tanan Hasam. It says in a Mishnah. Basar egel, if you have meat of a calf, shnitpach, that fluffed up, basar zakena, if you meat of an old animal, shnesmaich, that dried out, it got smaller. Mishtarin the kamoshahin, you measure it based on what it is now. If someone would eat it, you measure the size it is now. You don't look at the size it was, both stringently and leniently. You look at the size it is now. If it's like his eyes are now of size, it's a violation. It's less, it's not.
In the same assistance they were.
Gross. Shaheen. It must be, hold on, is there a gear to change?
This is the one who's going to debate it through.
Right.
Reading of this freedom.
Rav Rechia, Rabbi Yochanan, Mishtarin Kamos Shaheen. So Rav Rechia, Rabbi Yochanan, Amri Mishtarin Kamos Shaheen. So Rav Rechia and Rabbi Yochanan also you measure the way it is now. Rabbi Shmuel, Rabbi Shimon Bar Rebbe, Reish Lakish, Amri Mishtarin Kamos Shahai. I think that one's Shahayu. They say the way it was. So Meisvei, let's challenge it. Basar Egel, you have this calf, Shelo Hayabo Kashir, that was not the sufficient amount to be punished on it. Tavach, and it puffed up, Ta'amad al Kashir, and became the proper amount. Tahor, Mishavar, it was pure retroactively, meaning even if it came into something that was contaminated, or if it was, let's say, from a nevela, and it is pure. It is not anything it touched before it puffed up will not contaminate it. But from now on, it's tame. Now that it got big, it's based on the new side. It is tame. So you see, you go by the measure it is now. Could you grab me some water? Warm water. Yeah. Thank you.
That's hot.
Thank you. So my answer is Midir Banan. It's rabbinic. It's rabbinic prohibition. So even though on a Torah level it wouldn't be, when it comes to be lenient, you can't be lenient about it. Because on lenient level, on Torah level, you look at it the way it was. Rabbinically, since now it's in So pigul, as I'm sure you know already, is when someone intends to eat a carbon later. Nosar is when someone actually leaves the carbon over and tries to eat it later. EMR, if you say bishlomo diraisa, makes sense in talking about a Torah level. How do you get pigul v'nosar? That's what makes it pigul and nosar. EMR dirbanim say rabbinically, pigul v'nosar b'dirbanan mi'ika. Then is there any kind of pigul and nosar rabbinically? Now we're talking about what's the punishment? Kares. So kares is not that kares is the primary punishment for eating pigul. Kares is from Hashem. You can't rabbinically give someone kares. So what does it mean that you say that pigul and nosar are rabbinic? It either is the right amount or not. I mean, the rabbis can't make it be a Torah amount. Kares is a reality. It's not something the rabbis control. It says no. What it means, ema came betuma pigul dir. It's contamination of pigul, and matuma is nosar, and it's the contamination of nosar. You might have thought who of a tumas pigul, tumas nosar derbanan. The fact that pigul and nosar themselves are tame, that originally was derbanan. Kulahai b'derbanan lo avod derbanan. The rabbis didn't make the decree go so extreme. Meaning, as a general rule, like Rabbi Cohen said yesterday, the general rule, we don't make a derbanan on derbanan. But there are exceptions to that. We sometimes make a derbanan and a derbanan. And one of the exceptions is when they just make a blanket decree. They say, we're making this decree and say this applies everywhere, even on Dirabbanans. Which is what he showed us at the end, the Shulchan Aruch seems to hold. But basically the idea that when the rabbi said, we're stringent going by the size it is now, they could have said that decree only applies to Torah level prohibitions, because it said, just in general, since we have a need for decree by Torah level prohibitions, that we say goes currently by the size it was, that is now, even though it was smaller, in Torah level, it would be based on the original size. But once we make the decree on Torah things, we make the decree everywhere, even things that themselves are rabbinic, the size will go based on what it is now on a rabbinic level as well. Tashma, that's what taught us that they made the decree anyway. Tashma, come listen to the next price. Basar Zakena, you had the meat of an old animal, Shahaya Bokashir, that originally had the proper amount, but Samek, and it shriveled up. Pakos Mikashir, and shrank down less the amount. Tamei L'Shava, it was Tamei retroactively. I mean, as long as it had the proper amount, it was Tamei. Tar Mikan Laba, and it is pure from now on, to no longer contaminate something. It's not big enough. Amarabba, so you see that it goes by what it is now. So Amarabba, Rabba says, in any case, originally it had a proper amount, and now it's too small. Then it for sure has no amount. There's no argument about that case. In any case that originally it did not have the proper amount, and now it is, Evan agrees that's rabbinic, because since on the Torah level, since originally did not have that amount, then it's not enough to forbid it on a Torah level. So keep thinking, what's the case? They argue, that had the proper amount, Simek, and it shriveled up, and then it expanded. The Marisa, for one opinion, holds, and there's such a thing as being pushed aside by an Isser, that if something lost its status, that's loss of status is permanent. Even though it has, should have regained it, once it's pushed aside, it's lost it, it cannot come back. Marisa, the other opinion, says, no, ein duchem isura, no such thing as losing status by prohibition on a permanent level, meaning while it's small, it goes back to the original size. It's now the original size. We know it has a quantity of material to be prohibited because it originally had that quantity and the size. It shrank, now it's back to the original size. It's as if nothing changed. So no, once it was smaller, and the fact that we know when something smaller it expands, that's only going to be rabbinic. Those are the two ways of looking at it. So, Amar, is there anyone that holds that there's such a thing as something prohibited gets pushed aside and loses status permanently even when it comes back? But it says in a Mishnah, Kabetza Ochlin, you have exactly an egg-size amount of food. The rule is for things that are inherently tamei, like a carcass and a vela, it's tamei even in the size of exayas. But food items can only make something else tamei if they're the size of an egg. So if an egg of food, this is kosher food, but it became tamei. Shenicha b'chama, you left it in sun, and it shrank. Similarly, you have an olive-sized piece of a dead person. An olive-sized piece of a nevela. That shrank. V'chedasha and a lentil-sized piece of a sheretz, one of the 8 species that are tamei even as a lentil size. Kazayas pigel and a kazayas, an olive-sized piece of pigel. Size nosa, an olive-sized piece of nosa, leftovers. Size chelev, an olive-sized piece of bread and fats. All of them are tahor, and none of them can make something else tamei. And there's no full violation on them. There's no lashes, there's no karis, because of pigel, because of nosa, because of chelev. If you left them in the rain, the tafchu, and they expanded, tamein, they are tamei, and they're liable for pigel, noser, and chelev. This is tiyufta. This is a disproof of the manda amar yesh teicha b'yisurim. Tiyufta. That disproves the opinion that says there is such a thing as being pushed aside by prohibition. It is a full tiyufta. That opinion has been proven wrong. So we're back. So what we say is it goes by the size it is now. If it originally was small and now it's big, it's rabbinic prohibition. And if it was full size originally, it shrank and went back, that is a Torah prohibition. What's interesting is that in general, you don't find an opinion of an Amora being disproven by a Mishnah. Every Amora knew every Mishnah, so I don't know how it is if we have an opinion that says this, and we had these rabbis who said it, and clear Mishnah proves them wrong. Then generally, that's not supposed to be able to happen. Because every Amora knew every Mishnah, and there should never be a clear Mishnah that proves somebody wrong. So I don't know why that is. I didn't get a chance to look that up, but that seems to be going on here. I don't know why. Okay. Tashma, let's see another proof. Tormin to Ainin al grogros, Dominion. You can take truma of figs on dried figs by count. Now, dried figs are smaller than fresh figs. The rule for maisros, for tithing, is that you have to give the proper amount. Now, there's different types. There's truma, which you can give whatever amount you want. Ma'aser Rishon, you have to give 10% of what's left after you take off truma. From that Ma'aser Rishon, you give it to a Levi. The Levi takes 10% of that Ma'aser Rishon, gives it to a Kohen. And then going back to the original amount, whatever is left of the original, after you take off truma and Ma'aser, you have another 10%, and years 1, 2, 4, and 5, that's Ma'aser Sheni, bring to Yerushalayim there. Years 3 and 6, that's Ma'aser Ani, and give it to a poor person. But the only one of these that is a very amount is truma itself, at least according to the main opinion. As we'll see, not everyone holds that. So here you go with the amount. So EMR, if you say Bishlomo, if it makes sense, Hayu Mishirin, that you go based on the original measurement. So you look at the dried figs as if they're fresh. Sharper, then it's fine. You're taking 10 fresh ones compared to the 10 dried ones. We say in quantity and volume it goes by what the size it was originally, then everything's fine. You're getting the proper amount. Eliyamart Kamos Shahin. But you go based on the amount it is now, have the Marva Maestros. Then you're adding on to your tithing. Vatan, it says in Brisa, Hamar Maestros, someone gives additional tithing, then his actual fruit that he's planning on keeping for himself, those are all set up properly because you separate tithes for them properly. Maestro Sav Mekukalim. The Maestro is giving away, those are messed up. Or even the Maestro is keeping for himself, but the Maestro Sheni, that's messed up because you can't give extra. Try to give extra. Say, okay, here's 10%, you have 11% of it. Well, of that 11%, 10% is Meiser, and 1% is not Meiser, because you can't make more Meiser. Not only is it not Meiser, it hasn't had its own Meiser removed, because since you designated Meiser, then you didn't have in mind for something else to count as Meiser for it. So you can have that 1% that's extra. That's not going to be Meiser, that's going to still be Tevel, and there's a death penalty, heavenly death penalty sentence for eating Tevel. So the rest of your fruit, the rest of your produce is fine. Whatever you set aside as Meiser is messed up. Elo, so what is it? So why are you going to do it based on what it is now? Measure based on what it is now instead of by number. No, sorry, I said it wrong. Now, so maybe you'll say the other opinion then. This proves the other opinion that you go based on the following it.
The way it was.
It should say the way it was. It says the way it is. It's just the way it was. Aim a safer to the end part of it. Grow gross al terenim. When you're separating from dried figs on figs, b'mida, go by measurement. EMR, if you say b'shlomo l'kamos shehein, yeah, they says the exact same thing. It should say shahayu. If you go based on the amount right, this one should say Ashay. If you say it's based on the amount it is, sharper, that makes sense because you're going by volume, current volume. This one should be hayu. If you go based on the amount it was, then you're going to also in this case, Mara Maestros who you're giving extra. So now you're really stuck because either way you have to do it right, and we're being stringent on both ends to give the larger amount. You're not allowed to be stringent with a large amount because it just comes out not properly. He said it won't be, it won't be, you have to, we said, right, if you give extra, then that's not fixed.
Just intuitively, I would think.
What?
Intuitively, I would think if you give extra, that's
right. But we said you can't give, if you give extra, then it's not the right amount. It's not effective. It's effective on what you leave behind, not effective on what you take because the calculation doesn't work. So the more it says, simple answer. We're talking about the first truma, the main truma. In the first case, you're giving generously. Safe buying enough, the 10 part, you're giving generously. You're giving a generous amount. So if so, because really, truma, you're supposed to give about 2%, not 10%. So why is it saying you take 10? Like we said originally, no, sorry, it doesn't say that here. Never mind. It's saying it later. I'm jumping the gun. So Ema Seifa. Let's look at the end of the brisa. Amar Rabbi Yossi. Abba, my father, that's Rabbi Yossi. Hayinotel Eser Grogros Shebekzoa Al Tishim Shebakagala. He'd have 10 in one place on 90 somewhere else in the basket. So it's a ratio of 1 to 10. The Iba Truma Gedola, if we're talking about Truma, from Eser Maya Vidte. Why 10? The ratio of Truma is generally somewhere in the neighborhood of 2%. Say, an average person gives 2%, generous person gives 1 out of 40, 2.5%. A stingy person gives 1 out of 60, 1.66, repeating per percent. Why? But no one says 10%. I'd rather hear about Trumas Meiser scheme. We're talking about Trumas Meiser. Rabbi Elazar Ben Gomel, Ben changed it. Ben Gomel, yeah. Ben Gimel, Ben Gamla. So it's the opinion of Rabbi Elazar Ben Gamla or Gimel. Tanya, it says Rabbi Elazar Ben Gomel Omer says Nekshav Lechem Trumaschem. Literally, your Trumas, some of the Leviim. The Levim separate from the portion they give, they separate 1/10 they give to a Kohen. I will consider for you your Truma the same way that your Truma, that a regular Truma is. So I consider your Truma, Shtei Truma Sakasam Adaber. So I'm about both kinds of Truma, regular Truma and also Trumas Meiser that the Levi gives is the 10th of his 10th. And what is it comparing these two? One is talking about Trumas Meiser, one is talking about Truma Gedola, one is talking about Truma Meiser. Hashem Truma Gedola, just like the big truma is taken by omed by estimation of a makshava and with thinking without actually saying any words. Kach trumas meiser, so true the trumas meiser, the second tithe, the second tithe, but the 10% of the first tithe, nitla is taken by omed of makshava with estimation and with thinking without doing it. Similarly, ma truma gedola b'ayin yafa, just like big truma you can give generously. Af trumas meiser b'ayin yafa. So to second truma, I mean not the trumas meiser, truma of the truma, also called meiser of meiser, the truma of the meiser or meiser from the meiser. That is also b'ayin yafa. That is also given generously. Umina, and now so that's an answer. So if you answer the question and say we're talking about the truma from the meiser, and now you're allowed to give generously, even though we said in general when it comes to regular meiser, if you give generously, it messes things up. But we have this opinion that says you're allowed to give generously on trumas meiser, and therefore we're going to be stringent in both ways. Say if a trank you give based on what it was before, the expand you give based on what it is the other way. The trank you give based on what it is now, the expand you give based on what it is before. Both are more stringent, more generous. Says, well, we know, but from here itself, you can bring a challenge. Rabbi Yossi says, 10 in the place we put the dried out ones, they said 90 fresh ones in the basket. So EMR, if you say, so that's giving the small amount. Mikso is where the dried out ones are. The kakala are where the fresh ones are. So EMR, if you said Bishlom, everything we find like Kamosh Hayu, this one should be in the past, how it was, Amri, Shapur, then everything's fine. You give the small ones on the big ones, so that's okay. El EMR, say basically is now, Batzilu, you're giving too little. Kiasa Ravdimi, Amar Elazar, shiny grogros, that dried figs are different. Of Yachol Sholka, and you can always boil them, bring them back to their proper size. So now we're another layer deep, that you go by what it is now stringently, but we only have to be stringent for what it is now when it's an irreversible change. But the more knows from experience, I personally never tried it. The more I know from experience that if you boil dried figs, they go back to being full size. I've done with raisins. If you soak raisins, they don't get quite back to full size. They definitely plump up a lot. They have dried onion flakes. You soak dried onion flakes. I don't they get back to full size. They definitely get a lot bigger. Talking about the rabbis taught, torment to enim al grogros. You can take figs on dried figs. But makam shugila asos to enim grogros. Place it is normal to turn figs into dried figs. Globa grogros al tenim, but not to take dried figs on fresh figs. But feel the makam shugila asos to enim grogros. Even a place that's normal, dry out figs, turn figs into dried figs. So Amar Mar, you just said in this brisa, torment to enim al grogros. You're allowed to take fresh figs on dried figs, but makam shugila asos to enim grogros. Place that's normal to turn figs into dried figs. Where it says, the place where it's normal, yes, you can do that. The place is not normal, you can't. What's the case? If there is a Kohen there, a place that's not normal, low. Why can't you do that? It says in the Mishnah, any place you have a Kohen to give it to right away, you should take what's better, and fresh figs are better. Alapshita, rather, it's obvious to like a Kohen. There's no Kohen handy, and that's the only reason why you're allowed to take dried out figs. And you see, it says the end of that Mishnah, low grogros oteinim, you cannot take dried figs on fresh figs. Even in a place where no one turn fresh figs into dried figs. Even to like a Kohen, and if there's no Kohen handy to give it to, Milo, why can't you turn the fresh figs into dry? Why can't you give dried figs in place of fresh figs? Tanan, it says in the Mishnah, Kohen, a place there's no Kohen, you should take whatever lasts better, and dried figs last. So the first part of the Mishnah said there's no Kohen. That implies the second part of the Mishnah there's no Kohen. There's no Kohen. What's wrong with giving dried figs? They last better. You're supposed to give dried figs. How can the end part say, even places normal, you can't give dried figs? So Reisha but like a Kohen, the first part where there's no Kohen, save B'dika Kohen, and save the end part somewhere there's Kohen. It says, yes, you have to say that. Reisha like a Kohen, the first part you have to say there's no Kohen. Save B'dika Kohen, the end part you have to say there is a Kohen. Amar Papa says, Shema Minah, for this we see, in fact, we answer that way. You see, the Chakinan, we make a dog, we push things aside, we make ourselves uncomfortable a little bit. Malkwina Masnisin would rather establish a Mishnah, trade time is two different cases, even though it doesn't say so, but Malkwina betray tonight and not say it's two different opinions. So we'd rather say that the Mishnah is switching cases without telling us than we would say that the Mishnah is two different opinions without telling us. So we'd rather say that it left out switching cases than switching opinions. Okay, Mishnah. Kol Menachos, all the mincha offerings, niloshos b'poshrin. Like we quoted yesterday, every mincha offering was kneaded with warm water. Mashamran, and regard them, shlo yachamitzu, do not let them become chametz. V'im hechmitz, and they did become chametz. If the leftovers can eat kam chametz, over below, let's say, is a violation of a negative commandment. Shtem, as the verse says, kol mincha asher yakrivu Hashem, any mincha offering that he brought to Hashem, lo se'aseh chametz, don't let it become chametz. V'chayev al lishasa, and he's liable for kneading it, and even after it became chametz, he's not, it's still in violation if he looks at it and says, you know what, I'm going to mix this. And arranging it, setting up in order to be baked, that's also a violation. We're not supposed to do it either. And on baking it, that will also be a separate violation. So each person, if you're different people who did that, one person allowed to become chametz, one person kneaded it, one person arranged it, one person baked it. They all are in violation of the prohibition of making it chametz. You don't say that once making chametz, what's done is done, and now there's no further prohibition of allowed to become chametz. Rather, you say that anyone who furthers along the process of turning this into bread, chametz bread, that itself is a new violation, and there's lashes for that if it's on purpose. Okay, why don't we stop here? It's a good place to stop.
Oh,
The Glazer should be back by tomorrow.
sorry, it was late today.
Okay.
Is Gary on?
Gary's there and both cousins, yeah.
Oh,
Okay.
Okay. That's lach.